I broke up with my boyfriend, quit my job, packed up my entire life, and moved to Iceland for 7 months. Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm gonna break down what it's like living in Iceland, the biggest culture shocks I experienced, and my greatest takeaways from living in the Arctic Circle. So just sit down, get comfortable, maybe grab a beverage, and let's get into it. As I said, my name's Hannah. I'm a 27-year-old veterinarian and I've lived in Australia my entire life. I have had periods of my life where I've done really crazy things. One of those things was leaving my relationship, quitting my job, packing up my life, and moving to an entirely new country. I just want to preface with the fact that this is just one girl's experience. I'm not saying that this is how it is. This is just my opinion of what I experienced when I was there. I also don't speak Icelandic very well, so that creates a barrier and means that my interpretation of things is probably warped. It's probably not the same as someone that's lived there their whole life or that has a really good grasp of the language. Take everything with a grain of salt. This is just my experience. So, why Iceland? Why did I decide to pack up and leave Australia, one end of the globe, and move to the other side of the globe? The backstory for context is that I'm half Icelandic. My mum is from Iceland. She only moved to Australia in her 30s, I want to say. Sorry, mum, if that's wrong. Basically, my mum moved here when I was a baby, and we've lived in Australia ever since. Other than when I was a really, really little baby, like 1 year old, I have not lived in Iceland. I didn't learn the language. Mum didn't teach me Icelandic really at all. I've had quite a typical Australian upbringing, aside from the fact that my mum and both my parents are not Australian. Anyways, that's for context. I don't know, I just had this urge to go and live in Iceland. I just felt like if I didn't do it then, it was probably never gonna happen. I've always wanted to go and live in Iceland. Like I've always wanted to try to learn the language and spend some real time with my family there and just to experience what it's like to live in another place. To be completely honest, I would be pretty happy to move anywhere. Like I would be happy to pack up and move to Greece tomorrow, but realistically, it's hard to move to a place where you have no connections, you don't have a passport, all these sorts of things. I am very lucky and grateful that I have family in other parts of the world, and that definitely made this a whole lot easier. So basically, I packed up my shit and I moved to Iceland. Thankfully, I did have a job lined up because my mum kind of knows just like half of Iceland. If you know anything about Iceland, it is a tiny place. The total population of Iceland is like 300,000 people, which is not a lot of people at all. The town I grew up in Australia has a population of 500,000, so almost double the entire population of Iceland. If you're like thinking to yourself, oh, I've never really met an Icelander, that is why. You've never met an Icelander because there are barely any. We're a rare breed. Basically, my mum somehow has retained connections with most of Iceland. Anyone that has any kind of tie to Iceland, my mum knows who they are. She knows their family. She knows what they like to eat for dinner. Like, kudos to my mum for staying so connected to her culture and connected to her family and friends. But genuinely, I have met Icelandic people on the street and come to find out they know my mum. Because of that, when I decided that I wanted to move to Iceland, I told mum, I told her that I was looking for a job there and I was hoping to work somewhere as a vet because I work as a vet in Australia. Within a week, she had like reached out to someone she knew who reached out to another person, and I had a job offer. Thank you, mum, you're the best. So I was able to move to this place that I didn't know and had never been with a job confirmed, which was amazing. I really don't discount how hard moving to a new place would be without some kind of foot in the door. I was so lucky that I have primarily family to help me get over there and to make the transition easier. Really take my hat off to people that are just raw dogging it and going over. I tip my hat to you. Anyway, so I had a job lined up and I pulled the trigger and I decided to move to Iceland. Packed up all my things, moved to Iceland, lived there for 7 months, which means I experienced pretty much all of the seasons there. I arrived in the summertime, experienced the summer, experienced the autumn, began to experience the winter, and then I was like, I'm out. You'll be seeing me, which like as an Australian, no wonder. I think the biggest culture shock I experienced moving to Iceland was the friendliness of the people there compared to Australia. And this is not a dig at Icelanders at all. I actually think that Icelanders have a lot more, how do I say this in a way that's not offensive to Australians? I'm just going to say this irrespective to Australians. I think Icelanders are truly salt of the earth kind of people, if that makes sense. I think once you crack open the hard shell, some of the loveliest people you'll ever meet, but damn, is it hard to crack open that shell. Like the culture shock that I experienced just going there, and people don't say hi walking down the street. Like the Scandinavian way of life is very much like you kind of keep to yourself. Also, a big part of this is that I didn't speak Icelandic. I don't speak Icelandic. So that is another barrier between like having friendly, sociable interactions with strangers. I just did not have many because I didn't speak the language, and also people aren't as outwardly warm as they are in Australia. I remember when I came back to Australia, I think I came back and the first thing I did was I went to like a weekend market, and I couldn't believe the experience of walking somewhere and people saying hi to you and waving at you, going through the market stalls and having like little chit chat with people and everyone being very outgoing and friendly. I hadn't experienced that for months, and that was shocking. I think if you're someone from Australia or probably from the United States as well, if you're moving to a place like Iceland, you probably are going to be quite shocked by the cooler exteriors that people have. Definitely like a hard shell, cold exterior, and you have to work to break that down. It's not a overnight or a within a week kind of thing. I really felt like with all of my work colleagues who I worked with for 7 months, really at the time that I was leaving was when I was like, oh, I've cracked through. Like now we're friends. Now we can laugh. Now we like, they get me, I get them. But it took so long. It took basically the whole time that I was there of like whittling away at people to be like, I get these people, like we're connecting now on a deeper level, which was really sad because then I had to leave. Another totally crazy part of living in Iceland and probably most Scandinavian countries is the price of groceries and the cost of living. Crazy, crazy. I've never been so grateful to come back to Australia and go to the grocery store and just be like, wow, I can buy fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. It's beautiful and it's so affordable. Like I know obviously there's lots of places that are cheaper than Australia, but holy cow, things are either like double the price that they are in Australia, sometimes triple the price that they are in Australia, or I found most items in the grocery store, if I added about $4 Australian to the Australian price, that's what the Icelandic price would be. To every item, an extra $4, which really stacks up when you're buying groceries. The other big difference is that most of the fruits and vegetables there are being imported because you can't really grow anything in Iceland other than in a greenhouse. And so the very limited stuff that is grown there is grown basically all in a greenhouse. Otherwise it's imported. And what that means is that everything that's imported is kind of old. So coming from like a very privileged position where I've had amazing food my whole life, going to the grocery store and being like, oh, what do you mean I have to pay $15 for this punnet of like sad looking strawberries? Yeah, that really sucked. So I pretty much just survived on the cheapest meats and really unhealthy processed food for most of the time that I was there because I just didn't feel like I had the budget to buy fruits and vegetables. I know that sounds so crazy, but it was true. I was there also to try and travel a lot and travel with my friends. All of my savings I was putting into traveling. I just skipped fruits and vegetables entirely. Apologies to my body for that period. The other thing that was so different about living in Iceland was the dating culture. The dating culture in Iceland or in Scandinavian countries in general is very different to the dating culture in Australia. Now, I know a lot of girls in Australia have had really bad experiences in the dating pool. I get that. I've had my fair share of bad experiences as well. Primarily, Scandinavian dating culture is very casual. Basically, it's hookup culture where you start by hooking up with someone and then you might go out on a date with them, or then you might start to take things as more of a formal courtship. But in the beginning, it's very much just like everyone's friends. We might sleep together, you know, on a night out or something like that. And then if we like each other, we might then go through the dating process, which I think is very different to Australia. Most of my previous relationships that I've had in Australia, it's more formal. It's more like, you know, if you like me, you make your intentions known, you go on a date, you sort of go through those steps. You don't start with a hookup and then go to the other stuff. I also spoke to a lot of people that live in Iceland and they verified this as well. They were like, yeah, it's not normal to get asked out on a date and be taken out to dinner or something like that. So I just thought that was interesting. I think that's quite different to how it is here. Kind of to go along with the price of food and groceries, if you are not a wealthy person, eating out is not even a possibility. If you want to go to Domino's, for example, let's say, Domino's pizza is going to run you between 35 and 40 Australian dollars, which is crazy. It's wild. A Domino's pizza here might be, I don't know, $20 or $15 in a deal or something like that. $40 in Australia is gonna get you a 5-star dining experience, like a really nice meal. In Iceland, it gets you Domino's. At that point, I was just like, what is the point in eating out? If I have to spend that amount of money just to get Domino's, then I would rather just eat at home, save my money, and take more holidays, which I did plenty of. I think an amazing part of living in Iceland, which we don't have access to here in Australia, is that you are in close proximity of the rest of the European Union and the rest of Europe. So it meant that I could travel a lot more, which was one of the big reasons why I decided to move to Iceland, was that I was able to visit lots of places that I'd never been to. I went on, you know, some weekend trips, some trips for a week, which in Australia, you could never ever do that or feasibly do that because it takes like 24 hours to get from Australia to Europe. I would have to say that potentially my favorite thing about Iceland and living in Iceland, among a few other things, is the swimming pool culture. I loved the swimming pool culture. It was so great. Basically every single day after work, I would finish work at like 4 o'clock and then I would go to the gym, and the gym was connected to the public swimming pool. And if you're from Australia and someone says public swimming pool, the image that comes to mind is not cute. Like, I think I've been to a public swimming pool maybe once in my life prior to going to Iceland. The public swimming pools are not that nice. In Iceland, public swimming pool culture is huge. Everyone visits the public pools. They're all heated, so they're all like hot tubs at different temperatures. Everyone goes as like a social thing, as a decompressing after work. It's just huge. Everyone does it. And it is so much fun. There's something so nice about having this routine after work where I could go to the gym, exercise, get all sweaty, and then shower and get in these hot pools. Obviously, it's really cold outside, but you just sit in these really warm pools. There's different saunas and sometimes there's a cold plunge as well. And it was just such a nice daily routine. I loved it. Lots of people will go with their work colleagues or with their friends. And I just really like that. I like the rhythm of like work, exercise, and then socializing all in one day. I think that's really special. In Australia, that would be more like morning culture, and like, at least in the places I've lived, it's very much like wake up, get a coffee, go for a run kind of thing. So that would be the Australian equivalent, but there's something nice about doing it after work, especially in the winter. You're in the pool, it's snowing outside, like snow all around the hot tub, and you're just sitting in the hot tub, so cozy and warm. There's also hot dog stands. Hot dog stands outside of most of the pools, and everyone gets a hot dog at like after the pool. Such a random snack, but to be honest, probably one of the only things in Iceland that I could afford, So I really enjoyed a hot dog after the pool. That was really lovely. Obviously, the nature in Iceland is spectacular. It's so beautiful. And I don't think there's anywhere else in the world that compares or even has a similar flora or fauna. I just think Iceland's obviously amazing. I got to hike an active volcano, which was so incredibly cool. Actually invited a few of my friends over to Iceland and we hiked the volcano together, which was incredible. As beautiful as the nature is, it is also very unforgiving. You do need to be so careful in Iceland to make sure that you're safe at all times and to not drive when the weather is not allowing you to drive, because the weather in Iceland is a cruel mistress. In Iceland, they have these orange and red weather warnings. Orange meaning like the weather's very severe and you should try and stay inside, don't, do unnecessary things or drive unnecessarily. Red is like batten down the hatches and don't leave your house. And you would be shocked how regularly those warnings go off. Like, I was in Iceland for 7 months and I experienced several orange weather warnings. One of them being when I was supposed to be catching a flight to Ibiza. Did I get on that flight anyway? Absolutely I did. Was it the most terrifying experience of my life? Yes. Yes, it was. But if anyone's going to get you out of an orange weather warning on a plane, it's going to be an Icelandic pilot. I think the other thing that I didn't anticipate moving to Iceland, I was moving to a capital city, so I kind of expected it to feel like a big city. Little did I know, a country with a population of 300,000 people does not have a capital city that feels like a bustling city. For me, it felt like more of a small town vibe in the way that everybody kind of knows everybody. You can drive from one side of Reykjavik to the other side of Reykjavik in anywhere from 7 to 14 minutes. I never experienced a drive in 7 months that didn't fall between 7 and 14 minutes. That is the size of Reykjavik, just to give you like an idea in terms of scope and size. It is a small city. After I had been there for only a couple of months, I would run into people I knew everywhere. There's a limited number of shops, there's a limited number of public places. I was seeing people I knew every time I left the house, which for me personally, I would rather not, but that's just kind of the way it goes. And I was not used to that coming from a city where we have almost double the number of people that are in the entirety of Iceland. I think another thing that maybe I was not anticipating is that the Icelandic language is so hard to learn. So hard. When I was in high school, I studied French for maybe 4 or 5 years and I loved language learning. I did really well in French. I really enjoyed it. So I kind of thought Icelandic would be similar. Boy, was I wrong. Icelandic is potentially the hardest language you will ever try to learn. The biggest difference between learning a language like French or a Latin language versus learning Icelandic is that you can learn basic sentences in French and you can start like implying them in everyday life. Like you can go to the shop and you can have a go at putting together a sentence in French. Icelandic is not like that. It is so complicated. You can't just learn some basic vocab and start stringing things together because it just won't make sense at all. And people will look at you like you're crazy. I found there's a really big jump between I'm just starting out and I'm learning the language, getting to the point where you can actually try and start making conversation with people. I went to language school. I've studied Icelandic the whole time I was there, and I still had a really hard time with getting a grasp of even just the basics of the language because it is so complex. That one is still in the works. Hopefully one day I reach fluency. That would be the biggest goal. Right now I am pretty decent at understanding people when they're speaking. My own speaking, not so much. Actually, reading is my worst because I grew up listening to my mum and listening to people speaking Icelandic. My listening comprehension is pretty decent, but I never read Icelandic. I never saw it written down. So when it came to like reading things, I would know the word, but I would read it and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that's what that word looks like. Like I've never seen it written down before. Yeah, so that was really, really strange. All in all, living in Iceland was so incredibly different to living in Australia. But I'm so, so grateful that I had that experience and that I got to reconnect with my family and meet lots of new people and experience my own cultural heritage and background and kind of reconnect with myself in that way. If you're ever thinking about potentially taking the leap and leaving the comfortable and familiar and moving somewhere that you've never lived before, I highly, highly recommend it. Just do it, just buy the ticket, just pack your bag. It's so worth it, so worth it. And I grew so much from that experience. Is it one of the hardest things I ever did? Definitely, yeah. I'm not gonna lie to you and say that it wasn't hard, because it definitely was hard and there were plenty of low moments and lonely moments, but I think those are the moments that we grow from, and we don't grow when we sit in our comfort zone. We actually have to leave it to grow and develop as people, so I'm really glad I did that. I think another thing that I was really scared of going into moving to Iceland, because I'd been to Iceland a few times and I knew that this was a thing, was the daylight, or really the lack of daylight is the problem. Because Iceland is so far in the polar north, they experience really long summer days, like the sun never goes down in the summertime, basically ever, and really short winter days. The sun pretty much doesn't come up at all, in case you're wondering. So that was really fun when it was summer. I was having a great old time. I loved that the sun was always up. You could go for like midnight walks outside and it would still be sunny. It was honestly incredible. Obviously, being from Australia, I am a sun girl. The sun is my best friend. And so I loved the midnight sun. But then summer ends and winter comes in, and when winter arrives, there is no sun. Yeah. In winter, I would wake up in the dark, get ready for work in the dark, drive to work in the dark, work in the dark. If I was looking out a window at the right time at 11 or 12 o'clock in the middle of the day, I would see the sun just peek over the horizon like an early morning sun, and then very quickly go right back where she came from. And that was it. And then it would descend back into darkness, and I would drive home in the dark, and I would eat dinner in the dark, and I would sleep in the dark, and then I would wake up in the dark, and I would do it all over again. And if you can't tell how much that traumatized me, my God. Yeah. So I naturally struggle with sleep, or have struggled with sleep most of my life. I've been a semi-recovering insomniac when I'm having a good day, but Iceland fucked me up. Seriously. Without the sun to tell me to get up in the morning and to go to sleep at night, my body had no idea what it was doing. None whatsoever. So basically I was like up all night, sleeping during the day. There were so many nights that I just could not fall asleep, and I would end up going to work physically so exhausted because I hadn't slept, and then I would get home and immediately have to crash and pass out, and then because it's been dark the whole day, my body's so confused, I'm waking up at like 9 p.m. and then I would repeat that vicious cycle. So the lack of sun is no joke. To be completely honest, I think the biggest reason that I booked a flight and decided to come home was the sleep. I was not coping sleep-wise, and I didn't have that many people around me to help me to maintain a rhythm. It was very isolating and lonely being in a country where, you know, you don't have your friendship circle, you don't have your immediate family. Yeah, and then on top of that, with my sleep being really bad, I think I started to lose my marbles a little bit. I was so underslept. I was struggling so much to just make it to work, and also just find like the optimism and positivity to feel good about life in the dark when you haven't slept is really hard. That was definitely one of the biggest reasons why I decided to come home. I just needed to sleep, honestly. Year in, year out, they survived that winter, and it is honestly no small feat. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions for me about Iceland, or if you've lived in Iceland, or if you're Icelandic, hi, just leave a comment, let's have a chat. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.